An older black female CEO walked into the hotel she had founded, only to be met immediately by the young receptionist's cold, discriminatory gaze, who refused her a room solely based on her modest appearance and skin color. Without causing a scene or engaging in any argument, she calmly made one phone call and forced those who discriminated against her to pay the price for their mistake. The night gently descended over the city of Chicago. The sparkling lights from the skyscrapers reflected onto the peaceful Chicago River. Outside the famous Grand American Hotel, its grand lobby adorned in splendor, a yellow taxi quietly came to a stop. A woman stepped out of the car and stood still, gazing up at the luxurious building, her eyes holding something both familiar and distant. She was Eleanor Johnson, 65 years old, a black American woman who had once been hailed as a symbol of success and inspiration in modern America. Eleanor was the founder of the renowned Johnson Luxury Hotels chain, which owned over 20 luxurious properties stretching from the East Coast to the West Coast. But few knew that the Grand American was the first hotel she had built with her own hands, where she had once shared the deepest bond with her youth and ambitious dreams. Far from the image often seen in the media, adorned in glamorous dresses and sparkling diamonds, tonight, Eleanor wore only a simple thin woolen coat, underneath which was an elegant light blue dress, soft leather shoes, and a cream-colored scarf to keep warm against the cool Chicago breeze. Her gray hair was carefully styled into a neat bun, and her gaze, calm but carrying an inexplicable authority, conveyed a quiet strength. She stood there for a few seconds, silently recalling all the memories she once had here, memories of a young woman eager to be accepted and prove herself amidst countless challenges, racial prejudices, and gender stereotypes. Eleanor gently exhaled, a breath filled with emotions that no one but herself could truly understand. Then, slowly, she walked inside the hotel, carrying only a small, worn, brown leather handbag, showing signs of age. The hotel lobby still shone as beautifully as ever, the elegant crystal chandeliers casting reflections onto the polished marble floor. Wealthy guests in fine attire bustled in and out, the piano's melody softly playing, blending with the refined voices and laughter from every corner of the large lobby. But Eleanor did not draw attention. She was not there as a VIP or a high-ranking executive, but simply as an ordinary guest seeking rest after a long, exhausting journey. Her eyes were filled with affection as she looked around, sensing the familiar breath of the walls she had once chosen the paint colors for, the sofas where she had waited for the first guests, the potted plants she had carefully placed to bring life to the space. Eleanor smiled gently and approached the front desk, her steps firm yet quiet, like a breath, drawing no attention from the staff or the other guests around her. She did not rush to speak, instead silently waiting for the receptionist to lift their gaze, her posture carrying a quiet respect and humility, a hallmark of the experienced older woman she was. What she did not know was that her quiet and humble presence would set off an unexpected situation, a situation that would make everyone reassess their deep-seated prejudices, beginning with a seemingly ordinary phrase, but one that would cause a ripple throughout the most famous hotel in Chicago. Eleanor gently placed her small handbag on the front desk, her fingers lightly brushing the smooth, cold marble surface, which she still remembered in intricate detail from when she had chosen it over 30 years ago. Eleanor stood patiently, her gaze calm and unhurried, focused on the young woman behind the computer screen, who was absorbed in texting on her phone, her expression slightly furrowed, as though something had just disturbed her mood. After a few seconds, the young receptionist finally looked up, her eyes widening with a hint of confusion, as if she had just realized Eleanor's unexpected presence. Quickly regaining her professional composure, the receptionist flashed a polite, neutral smile, and softly asked, her tone courteous but somewhat lacking warmth, "Hello, How can I assist you?" Eleanor smiled faintly and replied in her characteristic, warm, deep voice, one that had helped her persuade countless business partners throughout her years of success in the ever-challenging world of hospitality. "I'd like to check in. I need a room reserved for VIP guests. My name is Eleanor Johnson." The receptionist quickly scanned Eleanor from head to toe, her gaze shifting slightly, the initial friendliness fading fast. Her perfectly groomed eyebrows raised slightly, and her meticulously manicured fingers flew across the keyboard. But after just a few seconds, she stopped. The young woman frowned, seemingly filled with doubt. Her voice grew more stiff and formal, yet colder. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson, but I've checked, and the hotel is fully booked." Eleanor was slightly taken aback but remained calm, responding gently, her voice still soft and filled with patience. "There must be some mistake. The Grand American always reserves a special room for me." Jessica Carter, the receptionist, had just turned 25 and had grown up in a wealthy suburban neighborhood of Chicago. Throughout her childhood and adolescence, Jessica had been carefully shielded within exclusive environments, rarely ever encountering situations she deemed confusing like this one. To her, a true VIP guest would never appear in simple attire and display such an overly humble demeanor. In her still naive and inexperienced mind, Jessica had unknowingly developed a bias. Wealthy and powerful individuals had to show their status through flashy clothes, expensive jewelry, and an overwhelming attitude. It was this unintentional bias that caused Jessica to look at Eleanor with a skeptical, indifferent gaze. She thought to herself, maybe this is just an older woman trying to use someone else's name to get a free luxury room. Quickly, Jessica made up her mind, repeating gently but firmly, "I'm very sorry, but our hotel is fully booked today." Eleanor's gaze faltered slightly, showing a hint of disappointment. She wasn't angry, nor was she accusatory. She simply felt a bit sad as the familiar, worn-out feeling of being doubted, a black woman of her age, dressed simply, crept up once again in her life. Eleanor stared deeply into the young woman's eyes, noticing the arrogance of youthful confidence, the inexperience, and the assumptions that led the young receptionist to this mistaken judgment. But Eleanor didn't argue or try to prove anything at that moment. She simply nodded, offering a smile filled with the compassion only someone who had weathered many storms could give. "I understand. Thank you." With that, Eleanor stepped back, not rushing to leave, but standing by the edge of the front desk. She calmly pulled out her phone from her slightly worn brown handbag, dialing a familiar number. A soft, composed voice answered on the other end. "Hello, Thomas." "It's me, Eleanor. I'm at the Grand American, and I've encountered a small issue with my room. Could you please check it out for me?" The call was brief, and Eleanor hung up, standing still as she waited silently. Her eyes gently looked out across the hotel lobby, where other guests were being warmly greeted by the staff without any trouble. On the other side of the front desk, Jessica stole a glance at Eleanor, her gaze a mix of hesitation and lingering suspicion. The young woman shook her head slightly, as if reaffirming to herself that she had acted entirely correctly. What Jessica didn't know was that, in just a few minutes, when that phone call began to take effect, all of her assumptions and the beliefs she had so firmly held would be completely overturned, and she herself would have to face the unexpectedly bitter truth. Eleanor put her phone back into her bag, still standing calmly in place, her eyes gently directed toward the front door, as if to avoid causing any further discomfort to the young receptionist behind the counter. But her calm demeanor and gentle handling only made Jessica more suspicious. Jessica silently observed Eleanor from behind the desk, a strange sense of discomfort rising within her. She couldn't understand why a woman who claimed to be a VIP guest, even asserting that she was the founder of the prestigious Grand American hotel chain, appeared so unusually modest, from her simple scarf to her worn-out leather shoes. She didn't resemble the elite in any way, luxurious, powerful, and always knowing how to attract attention. Unable to hide her impatience, Jessica quickly walked over to a colleague of hers, lowering her voice in frustration. "Do you see that woman? She just claimed to be Eleanor Johnson, the founder of our hotel." Jessica's tone carried a hint of sarcasm. Her colleague, a young man named Luke Thompson, glanced at Eleanor, furrowing his brows as he responded, "Eleanor Johnson? She must be mistaken. No one like her could be Eleanor Johnson. She doesn't look anything like what I imagined." Jessica nodded slightly, reinforcing her initial judgment. She silently congratulated herself for turning the woman away. In her naive thinking, she was sure Eleanor was merely pretending to be someone important to gain some sort of privilege from the luxury hotel. Jessica had heard similar stories from friends in the industry, and every time the troublemakers were guests dressed simply and lacking any grandeur, just like the woman in front of her. Eleanor remained still, her gaze peaceful as she took in her surroundings, her hands gently placed before her, as though waiting for something familiar. Soon after, from down the hotel hallway, a man in his 40s walked briskly toward the front desk. He wore a sharp suit with a small name tag reading, "Michael Harris, Shift Manager." Michael was a young and ambitious manager, having been at the Grand American for less than 6 months, but always nurturing dreams of rising higher in the company. He was quite meticulous, always careful, and afraid of making mistakes. When Jessica reported that an elderly woman was claiming to be the founder of the hotel, Michael immediately felt suspicious and decided to handle the situation as quickly and safely as possible, by refusing her. He approached Eleanor with a polite expression but a distant tone. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Michael Harris, the shift manager here. I was informed that there seems to be some confusion regarding your reservation. May I have your full name, please?" Eleanor answered calmly, without hesitation or any sign of tension. "Eleanor Johnson." Michael paused for a moment, slightly furrowing his brow before speaking in a firm tone. "I'm very sorry, but your name isn't on today's VIP list. Furthermore, our hotel is fully booked tonight. If you'd like, I can suggest another hotel nearby." Eleanor gave a faint, sad smile, but patiently explained once more. "I am Eleanor Johnson, the founder of this Grand American hotel. Since its opening, the hotel has always kept a room reserved for me without needing a prior reservation." Michael looked at Eleanor again, his gaze briefly flickering with uncertainty, but then quickly returned to its cold indifference. In his cautious mind, there was no way such a modestly dressed, older woman could be Eleanor Johnson, the living legend in the hotel industry he had heard so much about. Michael believed the woman must have been mistaken or was deliberately impersonating someone to claim special privileges. He lowered his head slightly, polite but firm. "Sorry, but there must be some misunderstanding. Eleanor Johnson is a very well-known figure, and she's not currently in Chicago. I believe you may have confused her with someone else." Jessica stood beside him, feeling more confident now that the manager shared her perspective. But Eleanor didn't show any sign of anger or argument. She gently nodded as if she had anticipated this situation, then quietly took out her phone again, making a quick call to another important person. "Hello, Anthony. I'm having a small issue at the Grand American. It seems your staff doesn't believe I'm Eleanor Johnson. Perhaps you should handle this yourself." Eleanor's soft yet powerful voice made both Jessica and Michael feel uneasy. They exchanged a confused glance. Michael tried to maintain his calm, but deep down, a sense of unease began to rise, a feeling he wasn't accustomed to when dealing with situations at the hotel. The tension subtly spread through the front desk area, like an invisible wave slowly rising, ready to break open in the moments to come. Both Jessica and Michael had no idea that with a simple phone call, Eleanor would soon set in motion a storm that would engulf the entire hotel. A storm neither of them could have ever expected. Michael took a step back, his expression showing a hint of discomfort as he watched Eleanor end the call with an unusual calmness. In his mind, the image of a powerful, glamorous Eleanor Johnson did not align with the modest, humble woman standing in front of him. Michael was sure that this woman was not only mistaken but also had an ulterior motive to cause trouble. As a young manager, he couldn't let anything tarnish the hotel's reputation, especially on a busy evening like this. With a quick but firm decision, Michael turned to Jessica and spoke quietly. "Jessica, call security. We need to handle this as quickly as possible." Jessica hesitated for a moment but quickly picked up the phone. Less than a minute later, two tall men in hotel security uniforms entered the lobby area. They didn't say a word, just stood still near Eleanor, close enough for her to clearly feel the pressure of their presence. Other guests in the lobby began to notice the odd scene. An older couple sitting nearby whispered to each other, their eyes fixed on Eleanor with suspicion. A group of younger guests standing by the door turned to look as well, curious about the situation. The soft sound of the piano from the far corner of the lobby seemed to fade amid the increasing murmur of whispered conversations. "What's going on?" a well-dressed woman whispered to her husband. He shook his head, his gaze never leaving Eleanor. "She seems to be causing some trouble, I think." A voice, quiet but loud enough to be heard, came from behind, reaching Eleanor's ears, causing a sharp pang of hurt in her heart. Eleanor stood at the center of the scrutiny and doubt, maintaining absolute composure, though deep within her, memories of her early, difficult days of building her career came rushing back. In those days, she had endured countless similar looks of suspicion, eyes that judged her not on her abilities but on her appearance, her skin color, and her gender. "Ma'am," Michael spoke again, this time more firmly, as if trying to make it clear that he was the one in control of the situation. "I would appreciate your cooperation. We truly don't want any trouble here." Eleanor looked calmly into Michael's eyes and responded in a soft yet sharp voice, filled with the strength of experience and self-respect. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm waiting for the person I just called to resolve this matter." Michael frowned, as if feeling challenged by Eleanor's calm demeanor. He glanced at the two security guards, subtly signaling them to move a little closer. The movement of the guards made the guests in the lobby even more curious. All eyes were now on Eleanor, the older woman with the modest appearance, being treated as though she were a troublemaker. Among the crowd, a few people began lifting their phones, recording the tense scene. The murmurs grew louder. Michael noticed this, and a sense of unease began to settle in. He lowered his voice, trying to maintain professionalism but sounding increasingly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Johnson, I think you should understand the current situation. If you don't cooperate, I will have to ask security to escort you out." Jessica stood just behind him, feeling a sense of unease as the situation seemed more serious than she had anticipated. But she still couldn't believe that the humble woman standing before her was actually the legendary Eleanor Johnson, the founder. Jessica whispered into Michael's ear, clearly flustered. "Maybe we should wait a little longer. What if she really is?" Michael immediately cut her off with a cold stare. He didn't want to be swayed at this moment, especially when he was certain he was doing the right thing to protect the hotel's image. Jessica, just follow the orders. Don't pay too much attention." Eleanor remained silent, her breathing steady, but her heart filled with sorrow and disappointment. What could have been a simple matter was being pushed too far due to misguided prejudices. But she knew well that there are moments in life that cannot be avoided, and she had decided to face it, silently waiting for the phone call she made to take effect. The tension in the lobby was palpable. The two security guards stood like statues. Michael kept his cold expression, and Jessica tried to avoid Eleanor's gaze. The curious guests stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen next. None of them could have imagined that, just minutes from now, the situation would completely change, and they would witness a shocking truth that would overturn everything they had just believed. Amid the tense atmosphere spreading throughout the hotel lobby, Eleanor stood quietly, her eyes gazing into the distance as if trying to avoid the stares directed at her. But the more she tried to avoid it, the more she felt the sharpness of each scrutinizing gaze, the whispers filled with doubt surrounding her, each one like a sharp blade cutting into her memories, stirring up things that seemed long buried. In that moment, Eleanor felt herself being pulled back to the difficult days of her youth, when she was just in her 20s, a young woman full of ambition stepping into the hotel industry. Eleanor clearly remembered that she had nothing but dreams, bare hands, and a steel will forged in the face of harsh prejudices about race and gender. At that time, a young black woman entering the business world, especially in the luxury hotel industry, was almost unthinkable, hard to accept. She could still vividly recall the first time she went to a large hotel in Manhattan, attending an important conference as an intern. Before she could even step into the grand lobby, Eleanor was stopped by a security guard with a cold gaze and a voice she would never forget. Employees use the side entrance. At that moment, Eleanor quietly walked to the side door with a heavy heart and teary eyes, trying to swallow her hurt and the deep insult to her self-esteem. That was just the beginning of many similar experiences, where she was overlooked in meetings, forgotten in promotion discussions, and doubted whenever she boldly spoke up with her ideas. There were nights when she returned to her small apartment in Brooklyn, sitting alone in the corner of her dark room, silently crying, wondering if she was wrong for trying to enter this world. But then, it was in those painful moments that she reminded herself, "I can't give up. I will prove that a black woman can succeed and stand equal to anyone." The memories flooded back so clearly that Eleanor instinctively placed her hand on her chest, where her heart was racing with emotion. She exhaled softly, her gaze still calm, but deep inside, a wave of sadness rose like an unrelenting tide. She could hardly believe that after more than 30 years of building her first hotel with her own hands and a heart full of passion, today she was standing here, right in the place she created, and once again facing the same doubt and disdain from the past. Michael stood there, his cold eyes scanning Eleanor bit by bit, as if she were an unwelcome nuisance that he was eager to rid himself of. Jessica beside him was no longer as comfortable as before. She began to feel something was wrong, but still lacked the courage to change her initial opinion. The guests around them continued to whisper. Eleanor inadvertently overheard the half-formed but painful remarks from the crowd, the biased speculations that made her heart ache. She must want something for free. Who would believe a woman dressed like that is the founder? Those words were like invisible daggers, cutting deep into her heart. Eleanor had once thought that after reaching the pinnacle of success, she would no longer have to endure such things. But today she realized that prejudice never truly disappears. It remains, always ready to reappear, at any time, with anyone. Eleanor took a deep breath, holding back the tears in her eyes as she faced the cold stares of the strangers around her. She had been through too much to know that sometimes silence is the greatest strength a person can have. But no matter how hard she tried to remain calm, Eleanor could not deny that her heart was trembling with deep hurt. She silently wondered, why, as a black woman, no matter how successful or hard I try, do I still have to prove myself over and over again? Standing still in silence, Eleanor waited for that important call to have its effect. She knew that in just a moment everything would be clear. But at that moment the painful feelings of the past were once again overshadowing everything. Once again, Eleanor Johnson had to stand firm with her self-respect and dignity, facing the harsh prejudices that life seemed unwilling to let go of. As Eleanor was still lost in her sorrowful memories, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hotel corridor, causing her to look up. Two men in elegant suits quickly appeared, their faces filled with anxiety, their expressions tense as they made their way toward the front desk area. Instantly, Eleanor recognized them. Thomas Reed, the vice president of the corporation, and Anthony Price, the regional executive director for the Midwest, the two men she had just called. Thomas Reed led the way, his breath heavy from having run down from the upper floors. When he saw Eleanor standing silently between two security guards, his eyes immediately filled with panic. He stopped, stunned for a few seconds before quickly advancing toward her with a look of remorse and concern. "Mrs. Johnson, I am terribly sorry. I never expected this to happen." Right behind Thomas was Anthony Price, his face pale, his voice trembling as he realized Eleanor was standing there, under the scrutinizing gazes of everyone around. "Eleanor, are you okay? I am so sorry. This is entirely our fault." The unexpected appearance and the respectful, anxious demeanor of the two powerful men immediately shifted the atmosphere in the lobby. The murmurs of gossip from earlier quieted down, replaced by stunned silence. All eyes now turned from Eleanor to the two high-ranking members of the corporation, and then back to Eleanor, with expressions of surprise and clear remorse. Jessica stood frozen behind the front desk, her hand instinctively lifting to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. The cold words she had used to turn away Eleanor echoed back in her mind, causing a chill to run down her spine. She turned to look at Michael, realizing that he too stood still, his face ashen, beads of sweat beginning to form on his forehead. All the confidence and firmness he had shown earlier vanished, leaving a trembling Michael confronted with the truth now laid bare. Michael immediately took a few steps forward, his voice stammering with panic. "Mr. Reed, Mr. Price, I had no idea this was Mrs. Johnson, really. Thomas Reed raised his hand to silence Michael, his eyes stern, filled with disappointment and anger. His voice dropped low, clearly enunciating each word. "Harris, do you know who you are standing in front of? This is Mrs. Eleanor Johnson, the founder of the Grand American Hotel, and our entire corporation." At that moment, Anthony Price turned toward Jessica, his gaze severe, making her shrink back. His voice was cold. "Carter, why didn't you check the VIP guest list before acting so thoughtlessly?" Jessica went silent, unable to speak a word. The prejudices she had been so sure of came crashing down in an instant. She wondered why she had so easily judged a person based only on their appearance. The two security guards quickly stepped back, showing their confusion and embarrassment as they realized the true situation. The guests who had been standing around now looked at Eleanor with an entirely different gaze, shifting from suspicion to respect, tinged with a little shame. Some had even taken out their phones to capture this unexpected scene, whispering among themselves, unable to believe that the simple, elderly woman standing there was the legendary Eleanor Johnson. Eleanor remained standing there, her expression calm but full of authority, subtly signaling for Thomas and Anthony to regain their composure. She spoke gently, her voice soft yet carrying such command that the entire room fell into complete silence. "I do not need any apologies or explanations. I only hope that this will be the last time something like this happens at my hotel." Thomas and Anthony immediately bowed their heads, their voices in unison. "Yes, Mrs. Johnson." Eleanor cast one last glance at Jessica and Michael. She didn't scold them, nor was she angry. She simply looked at them with a deep, thoughtful gaze, one that was enough to make the two young people understand the grave mistake they had just made. At that moment, no one in the hotel lobby could take their eyes off Eleanor Johnson. They realized they had just witnessed a rare moment, a profound lesson about the rush to judge others based on appearances and mistaken prejudices. And in that moment, everything changed. Eleanor didn't need to say another word. The truth that had just been revealed spoke louder than any reprimand she could have given. As soon as Eleanor finished speaking, Thomas Reed immediately turned to Michael and Jessica, his voice stern and firm, no longer showing any patience. "Mr. Harris, Ms. Carter, I order both of you to prepare a VIP room for Mrs. Johnson right now. Ensure everything is arranged perfectly." Michael lowered his head, his shoulders visibly tense, his face reddened with embarrassment and fear for the mistake he had just made. He no longer dared to look Eleanor in the eye, only nodding repeatedly, his voice trembling, losing all the confidence he had earlier. Yes, sir, I will have it prepared immediately." Jessica stood behind, slightly stepping back, her hands trembling as she adjusted her collar, trying to hide the growing unease in her heart. The situation had escalated far beyond her initial expectations, and she was beginning to feel the full weight of the mistake caused by her own prejudice. Jessica quickly glanced at Eleanor, a sense of shame rising within her as she recalled the cold words and suspicious glance she had just directed at the woman. Anthony Price immediately stepped up to Eleanor's side, bowing politely, his voice full of sincerity. "Once again, I sincerely apologize to you, Mrs. Johnson, for this unfortunate experience. We will thoroughly investigate and take strict action against those involved. Please accept our apologies." Eleanor looked at Anthony and Thomas, her gaze still gentle, with no trace of anger, but full of determination. "I did not come here today to punish anyone. What matters most to me is how you train and guide your staff. Let this be a major lesson." "Yes, certainly," Thomas responded quickly, his face showing respect and commitment before turning back to Michael with a sharper tone. "Mr. Harris, I want you to take direct responsibility for overseeing the preparation of the VIP room. There must be no further mistakes." Michael quickly nodded and hurried behind the reception desk, making a phone call in a rushed tone, instructing staff to urgently prepare the most luxurious room on the highest floor of the hotel. Tension enveloped the reception area, with hotel staff quickly moving back and forth, all working with anxious, worried faces, dreading the consequences of what was about to unfold. Jessica stood silently in a corner, trying not to cry in front of everyone. For the first time in her life, the young woman realized the devastating power of unconscious prejudice, the kind that could destroy trust and hurt others deeply. She suddenly remembered what her mother always taught her: never judge anyone by their appearance. But at this moment, she could only blame herself for making such a grievous mistake. Other hotel staff soon began to realize what had just occurred. The atmosphere throughout the entire Grand American Hotel quickly shifted. The initial murmurs of doubt turned into whispers of regret and concern. Everyone understood that a mistake like this, especially insulting the founder of the corporation, would not be easily forgiven. This is definitely going to reach the top leadership, a young female employee whispered to her colleague. Michael and Jessica might lose their jobs, her colleague replied with deep worry. Eleanor looked around, sensing the strong shift in the atmosphere, but she maintained her calm and composure. Instead of becoming angry or offering further criticism, she chose to remain silent, observing quietly, waiting to see whether this lesson would truly be absorbed as she had hoped. Thomas Reed turned to Eleanor again, speaking gently, full of respect and apology. "Madam, the VIP room will be ready in just a few minutes. I hope you can forgive this incident. We assure you this will never happen again." Eleanor gently nodded in response, her voice small but clearly resonating in the absolute silence of the hotel lobby. "What I need is not a promise. What I expect is change." Thomas bowed deeply, realizing that before him stood not just the powerful founder of the corporation, but a woman who had weathered countless storms to achieve her position today. Her soft words contained no threat, but they were stronger and sharper than any reprimand he had ever heard. Eleanor looked back at Jessica once more. Her gaze was gentle, without blame, but it was so deep that Jessica felt as though her heart was being squeezed. She knew that after today, her life and perspective would never be the same again. The atmosphere in the Grand American Hotel at that moment was not just tense. It held something greater, a profound and powerful lesson in respect and the value of humanity. A lesson that Eleanor Johnson had spent her entire life striving to convey. One thing was certain. From that moment on, no one present at the hotel would ever forget that priceless lesson. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight gently filtered through the glass windows of the large meeting room at the Grand American Hotel, bringing a touch of warmth to dispel the heavy atmosphere lingering from the previous night. Eleanor had arrived early, standing silently by the window, her gaze fixed on the familiar city of Chicago, lost in thought. In the room, no one dared speak loudly. Everyone sat in silence, their anxious eyes directed towards the authoritative, middle-aged woman standing by the window. At exactly 8 o'clock, Eleanor turned around and calmly walked to the seat at the center of the table. She glanced around at the senior management faces present, pausing slightly on Michael and Jessica, who sat next to each other, their faces tense, completely lacking their usual confidence. Eleanor showed no signs of anger, nor did she rush to get to the point. Instead, she spoke in a gentle yet firm voice, like a seasoned teacher addressing the most important class of their life. "Good morning, everyone. I know none of us wanted to have a meeting like this, but sometimes it's the unexpected events that give us an opportunity to reflect on ourselves." Her tone was composed, carrying no harsh reproach, but it was enough to silence the entire room. Eleanor continued, her calm eyes meeting those of each person seated around the table. What happened last night wasn't just a simple mistake, it was the result of something much more serious. Prejudice. We all know that this hotel was built on the foundation of respect and equality for every guest, but clearly we have failed to live up to that. Michael lowered his head slightly, his fingers clutching his pen tightly, feeling a wave of shame and guilt surge through him. He had never thought he would make such a grave mistake, especially in front of such a powerful founder like Eleanor Johnson. Beside him, Jessica sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the floor, her pale face reflecting the deep remorse that was rising within her. Eleanor continued, her words heavy with meaning, yet still filled with warmth and understanding. "I do not blame you for not recognizing me. I blame you for allowing your hasty judgments to cloud your ability to see the true worth of others. You chose to believe in prejudice rather than in truth. This not only hurt me, but it also hurt our hotel, the place I once had such high hopes for." Thomas Reed and Anthony Price nodded slightly, their serious yet admiring gazes directed towards Eleanor. They understood that her words were not an accusation, but a strong reminder of ethics and responsibility, a profound lesson for everyone present in the room. Eleanor paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and continued, her tone softening just a bit, as if trying to ease the heavy atmosphere that hung over the meeting room. "I want you to understand that respect is not reserved for the wealthy, famous, or luxurious guests. Respect is for every guest who steps into this hotel, no matter how simple their appearance may be. We must always remember that a person's dignity is not defined by how they dress or their outward appearance, but by their kindness and the way we treat them." At this point, Eleanor's voice was filled with persuasion and authority, compelling everyone in the room to listen intently. Michael felt his heart tighten, as for the first time, he truly understood the deep consequences of his thoughtless actions the previous night. Jessica, sitting beside him, also fully grasped the mistake she had made, an error not only related to work, but also to the way she lived and thought. Eleanor gently concluded her speech, her gaze softening with compassion. "I hope that after today's meeting, each of us will reflect on ourselves. This is not just a lesson for work, but a profound lesson on how we should live as decent human beings. Remember, the hotel was not only built from stone and glass, but also from sincerity and respect for everyone." The room fell into a deep silence, no one daring to speak. Eleanor's words resonated in their minds like the most powerful wake-up call. They not only felt the weight of the responsibility placed on their shoulders, but also realized that these seemingly harmless mistakes and prejudices could destroy everything Eleanor had spent her life building. Finally, Eleanor stood up gently, offering a soft, warm smile, and concluded the meeting with a simple but profound statement. "I believe you will change." She walked out of the meeting room, leaving behind a space of absolute quiet. All those present understood that after today, the Grand American Hotel would never be the same. Real change had begun. Immediately after the tense meeting, Eleanor quietly walked into the staff lounge, where the young woman, Jessica Carter, was sitting alone at a small table by the window. Jessica had her head down, her hands lightly resting on her knees, trying to hide the overwhelming anxiety building up inside her. The soft morning sunlight streamed through the thin glass, illuminating the pale face of the young woman who had just made one of the biggest mistakes of her life. When the door gently opened, Jessica startled and looked up, realizing it was Eleanor Johnson who had entered. She quickly jumped to her feet, her voice tense and trembling as she spoke. "Ms. Johnson, I'm so sorry." Eleanor gently raised her hand, signaling for Jessica to sit down, her gaze warm like a caring mother trying to soothe the fear of a child who had made a mistake. "There's no need to be so tense, Jessica. I'm not here to scold you. I just want to talk with you for a moment." Jessica slowly sat back down, still unable to meet Eleanor's gaze, feeling a deep sense of shame and unease in her heart. She blamed herself for acting thoughtlessly, for unintentionally causing harm to the woman she should have respected the most. Eleanor sat down in the chair opposite Jessica, slightly leaning forward, her eyes filled with understanding and empathy. She asked gently, her tone calm and familiar, as if speaking to a close family member, "Jessica, I want to know, what made you think that I couldn't be Eleanor Johnson?" Jessica hesitated for a moment, then answered softly, her voice trembling. "I don't know, ma'am. It's just, you don't look like what I imagined. I thought someone like you would appear very glamorous, very powerful. Not so simple like this." Eleanor smiled gently, her eyes slightly distant, lost in thought as she reflected. I understand. I was once you, Jessica. I too was judged by my appearance. Jessica looked up, a mix of surprise and curiosity in her gaze, as she listened to Eleanor continue in a soft, sincere tone. When I was young, I was a receptionist just like you. Back then, I had to endure looks of suspicion, demeaning words, just because I was a young black woman entering a business world that was mostly reserved for wealthy white men. I was once stopped by security at the door, treated as invisible by customers, and even told by my own manager that I would never get far. Jessica fell silent, each of Eleanor's heartfelt words seeping into her heart, helping her realize that the powerful woman before her had endured pains she had never imagined. Eleanor continued, her voice still gentle, yet imbued with the strength of experience and deep understanding. I once thought that if I succeeded, became rich and famous, I would never have to endure such disrespect again. But then I realized prejudice never completely disappears. It just hides somewhere, ready to emerge at any moment. The most important thing is that we learn to see others with our hearts, not by their appearance. Jessica felt her nose grow teary, tears welling up in her eyes. Her voice grew hoarse with emotion as she spoke. I was really wrong. I never realized my actions could hurt so deeply. I'm truly sorry, ma'am. Eleanor gently placed her hand on Jessica's shoulder, her voice even softer, as if comforting a child who had just learned an important life lesson. I know you didn't mean to, Jessica. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. I've been in your shoes, made similar mistakes, and I know how painful it can be. But from those mistakes and wounds, I grew. I learned what it means to be compassionate, to understand others. Jessica looked up, meeting Eleanor's eyes for the first time with sincere respect and deep gratitude. She whispered softly but clearly, "Thank you for giving me the chance to understand my mistake." Eleanor smiled warmly, nodded gently, and stood up. Before leaving the staff lounge, she turned back to look at Jessica once more, her voice sincere and profound. Jessica, always remember that everyone carries a story within them. Always try to see people with your heart and compassion instead of through preconceived judgments or hasty assessments. As Eleanor gently closed the door behind her, Jessica remained seated alone in the small staff lounge. She felt as though something inside her had been healed, yet at the same time, she knew her life would never be the same again. Eleanor had not only left her with a profound lesson but also with a spark of hope, a chance to change herself from deep within. The door to the hotel room gently closed, but Eleanor's heartfelt words still echoed clearly in Jessica's mind. The young woman sat quietly at the small table, her gaze lost in thought as she stared out the window, filled with a mix of conflicting yet profound emotions about the life story Eleanor had just shared. A moment later, the door opened again, and Eleanor returned, this time with 2 steaming cups of tea in hand. She gently placed one cup in front of Jessica and sat down across from her, her expression kind and caring, as though wanting to soothe the turmoil still swirling in the young woman's heart. Jessica, I'd like to tell you a bit more about the early days when I first entered the hotel industry, Eleanor said softly, breaking the silence. Jessica looked up slightly, her eyes still glistening from the emotions stirred within her, but now there was a sense of attentiveness and readiness to listen. Eleanor smiled gently and continued, her voice slow, each word painting vivid pictures of memories in Jessica's mind. Back then, I was just an ordinary receptionist at a small hotel in New York. I was eager, full of enthusiasm, and always trying my best to earn recognition from others. But life was not as simple as I had imagined. Eleanor paused for a moment, her eyes briefly filled with sadness, as if looking back at herself many years ago. One day, while I was working the front desk, a wealthy guest walked in and didn't even look at me once. He immediately approached the white staff member beside me, even though she was busy. I politely stepped forward to ask if I could help him, but he glanced at me with surprise and said, "Oh, I thought you were just the cleaning lady." Jessica froze, her mouth slightly agape in disbelief at what she had just heard. Eleanor nodded gently, her gaze deep and steady, her voice calm as she recounted the truth of her life without anger, simply telling it as it was. At that moment, I stood still, my heart full of pain, but I didn't dare say anything. That was the first time I felt the frightening power of prejudice so clearly. Just because I was a young black woman, people immediately placed me in the lowest position they could imagine. Jessica felt as if something inside her had shattered. She gazed deeply into Eleanor's warm yet powerful eyes, and for the first time, she truly understood the invisible wounds the woman had borne throughout her life. Eleanor continued, her voice soft, as if trying to help Jessica understand more of what she had been through. From that day on, I decided I would never let others define me by my skin color, my age, or my appearance. I couldn't change everyone's prejudices, but I could change the way I reacted to them. And the most important lesson I learned from those wounds was to always treat others with respect and sincere understanding. Jessica lowered her head, a tear quietly falling down her cheek. She suddenly felt a deep regret when she realized that she herself had become someone who caused the same pain Eleanor had once endured. She whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "I never imagined I could cause you the pain you once had to endure. I'm truly sorry. I was wrong." Eleanor gently placed her hand on Jessica's, her voice tender as a mother comforting her child after a great mistake. "Jessica, what matters is not the mistake you made, but how you face it and learn from it. We all make mistakes. I share these stories not to make you feel guilty, but to help you understand that behind every person, there are stories and pains that we cannot see if we only judge by appearance." Jessica sat in silence, feeling as if her heart was being healed little by Eleanor's sincere, forgiving words. She understood that, from this day forward, her perspective on others would never be the same. The prejudices, the hasty judgments that had once existed within her, were now starting to melt away, replaced by deep understanding and empathy. Finally, Jessica looked up, her eyes clearer than ever, and spoke in a trembling voice but with determination. "Mrs. Johnson, I promise, I will never let this happen again. I'm truly grateful that you shared this story with me." Eleanor smiled warmly, her eyes filled with hope and trust. "I believe you can do it, Jessica. Just always remember that if we treat others with our hearts and kindness, prejudice will have no place to exist." Jessica nodded softly, her heart now filled with a new resolve, a resolve to become a better person, someone who could truly recognize the value of others from the bottom of her heart. And she understood that the invaluable lesson Eleanor had just given her was not just a story, but a gift that could change her life forever. After Eleanor's heartfelt words, the small room seemed to pause in a silence filled with emotion. Jessica slowly looked up, meeting Eleanor's gaze with eyes full of both gratitude and a deep resolve to change. The young woman took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly but now carrying the strength of genuine sincerity. "Ms. Johnson, what you've shared really made me realize a lot. I was wrong to let my shallow judgments hurt you. I want you to know that I will strive to change, to never make the same mistake again." Eleanor smiled gently, looking at Jessica with eyes full of trust and encouragement. She spoke softly, each word like a message from her sincere heart. "Jessica, I'm glad you understand that. Life always gives us the opportunity to learn from our mistakes. What's most important is how we grow and overcome them." Eleanor paused, her gaze drifting into the distance, as if reflecting on the long journey she had personally traveled to learn that lesson. After a brief moment, she continued, her voice deep and slow, carrying a clear sincerity. "You know, Jessica, each of us carries a unique value that cannot be measured by appearance or external wealth. A person's worth lies in their dignity, in how they treat others, and in how they rise above prejudice to succeed in life." Jessica stood still, feeling each of Eleanor's words seep deep into her mind and heart. Eleanor continued, every sentence carving a meaningful message deeper into the young woman's soul. "Remember, appearances can easily deceive us, but a person's true dignity and character cannot be hidden. We need to look at each other with our hearts, not with hasty glances or thoughtless judgments." Jessica nodded quietly, her initial shame now replaced by deep gratitude. The young woman fully understood her mistake now, and all she could feel in her heart was one strong desire: to be forgiven by Eleanor, and more importantly, to be given the chance to start anew. "Miss Johnson," Jessica spoke softly, struggling to contain the surge of emotions, "I promise you, I will never let these mistakes happen again. I will try my best to become a better person. Please, trust me." Eleanor gently looked at the young woman in front of her, knowing that Jessica was sincere. She placed a gentle hand on Jessica's shoulder, her voice warm like a mother offering her child the most valuable piece of advice. "I believe in you, Jessica, but I want you to make this promise to yourself. Always try to look at others with respect and kindness. That is the best way to ensure you never repeat the mistakes of yesterday." Jessica bowed her head deeply, feeling as though her heart was being cleansed by Eleanor's sincere, understanding words. She knew this wasn't just a promise. It was a powerful commitment that would change the way she lived and worked in the future. That very afternoon, Jessica sat alone in the small break room, picking up a pen to write the most sincere words she had ever written. A heartfelt apology to Eleanor without any embellishments, without trying to justify her mistakes. Just pure sincerity and deepest gratitude. "Dear Ms. Johnson, I don't know how to express fully the gratitude and sincere regret I feel right now. What you shared today has truly changed my life. I understand now that I was wrong to judge others based on their appearance, and I promise I will never let this mistake happen again. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to understand more about myself and life. Sincerely, Jessica Carter." After finishing the letter, Jessica carefully folded it and gently placed it into an envelope. Inside, she felt as though she had just lifted an invisible weight from her heart. She knew this was the first step in the biggest journey of change in her life. When Eleanor received the letter from Jessica, she quietly smiled, a smile filled with the deepest sense of fulfillment. For her, changing a person was always more important than any punishment or rebuke. And in that moment, Eleanor understood that the message she had wanted to convey all these years had finally reached the heart of a young person. That was the greatest success of her life, far beyond any titles, achievements, or power that people often praise. It was true change, starting from one person, one heart, and one life. Jessica's heartfelt apology letter was now safely in Eleanor's hands, and it was at that moment that she understood more clearly than ever. It was time for a true, profound change throughout the entire system of the hotel chain she had built. Eleanor stood up and walked lightly to the large window. her deep gaze looking out at the familiar Chicago cityscape, her mind resolute about what she was about to do. The next day, in a special meeting with the senior leadership of the hotel group, Eleanor appeared with an unusually calm yet stern expression. Every word she spoke rang clear and strong, making all those present in the meeting room feel the weight of the decision she was about to make. I know that all of you are very concerned about what has happened, but the most important thing right now is not to find someone to punish. It's to fundamentally change the way we work and how we view people. Eleanor paused for a moment, locking eyes with Thomas Reed and Anthony Price, who were attentively listening with serious and worried expressions. She continued with a sharp but still composed tone. I want a strong reform in the employee training system across our entire hotel chain. We need completely new training programs, not just focusing on professional skills, but more importantly on how to treat people with respect, kindness, and understanding. Anthony Price immediately nodded, his face showing clear agreement with this decision. Thomas Reed also spoke up with a tone full of commitment. Ms. Johnson, I completely agree with you. We will start the overhaul of the employee training program immediately. Eleanor smiled slightly, her eyes reflecting an even sharper determination. Good, but I want you both to understand that this is not just a temporary request. This is a long-term, profound change. I don't want dry theoretical lessons. I want real stories, real experiences to be incorporated into the training program. Employees must understand that every guest who walks into our hotel carries a story and deserves to be treated with the utmost dignity. Eleanor scanned the room, her eyes briefly stopping at each person as if to ensure everyone truly absorbed the message she had just conveyed. The atmosphere in the meeting room grew more solemn than ever, as everyone understood that a new era was beginning. And, Eleanor continued, her voice lowering but still clear, I will not just watch from afar. From now on, I will frequently visit our hotels under the role of a secret guest. I want to personally assess the quality of service, with no prior preparation, no special treatment. Just like an ordinary guest, so I can truly see how our employees treat customers. The room fell into complete silence, the senior leaders exchanging tense but determined glances. They knew that from this moment on, nothing would be the same. Eleanor was not only asking for a theoretical change. She would personally oversee and evaluate that change through her own experiences. Thomas Reed was the first to break the silence, his voice sincere and resolute. Ms. Johnson, we fully understand the importance of this decision. We will take immediate action and ensure that every hotel in the system is ready for this profound change. Eleanor nodded gently, her expression softening once more, a flicker of new hope shining in her deep, experienced eyes. I trust you, but remember, change is not easy. It takes time and long-term commitment. I want every employee, from the lowest to the highest level, to understand that treating customers with heart and kindness is what makes us a truly proud hotel. Everyone in the room silently nodded, deeply understanding what Eleanor was conveying. They all knew that once again, Eleanor Johnson had made a groundbreaking decision. Not just changing the way a system operates, but changing the way thousands of people working under her name live and work. The meeting ended with an atmosphere that was both tense and hopeful. As Eleanor walked out of the room, the leadership team exchanged glances filled with both worry and determination. They knew that from this moment forward, there would be no room for any carelessness or prejudice to exist. Eleanor Johnson had started a true revolution, not through power or punishment, but through dignity, kindness, and respect for everyone. And deep down, each person knew that they were the ones who would carry this story forward, not just through words, but through actions, starting today. As Eleanor's gentle footsteps left the meeting room, she could clearly feel that the strong decisions she had just made were beginning to spark a profound wave of change throughout the entire hotel. The tension in the air slowly gave way to seriousness, determination, and a hint of fragile hope. Something Eleanor had always sought to instill in those who had journeyed alongside her through this challenging path. Before leaving the Grand American Hotel to return home, Eleanor passed through the main lobby once more, the very place where not long ago she had stood under the skeptical gaze of so many. Now, the scene before her was completely different. The reception staff were warmly greeting each guest, their voices gentle and sincere smiles on their faces, causing Eleanor to smile contentedly in return. In the far corner of the reception desk, Jessica Carter was warmly assisting an elderly couple, her voice softer and more sincere than ever. Eleanor paused for a moment, discreetly observing the young woman. She realized that Jessica was truly trying, bit by bit, to correct her mistake, not out of fear or obligation, but because she had genuinely understood the lesson Eleanor had aimed to impart. Jessica suddenly looked up, unexpectedly noticing Eleanor standing from afar. The young woman was momentarily startled, but her gaze softened instantly, and she flashed a gentle, grateful, and sincere smile toward Eleanor. It was a brief moment, but enough for Eleanor to feel warmth and contentment spread through her heart. Eleanor gave a slight nod, a simple gesture that conveyed forgiveness, encouragement, and a deep trust in Jessica. In response, Jessica gently placed her hand over her chest, her eyes filled with determination, as if silently committing to always remember the profound lesson Eleanor had given her. Stepping out of the hotel, Eleanor took a deep breath of the fresh morning air of Chicago. Her heart felt much lighter and at peace. The sorrow and hurt of the previous day had dissolved, replaced by a deep sense of contentment, for she understood that her story was not just an unfortunate incident, but an opportunity to bring about real change, something she had dedicated her life to cultivating. The car was waiting in front of the hotel. Eleanor approached, but just as she was about to step inside, a staff member hurried toward her. Eleanor turned around, surprised to see it was Jessica. The young woman's face was flushed with emotion, holding a small white envelope in her hand. Jessica bowed her head gently and softly handed the envelope to Eleanor, her voice trembling with sincerity. "Miss Johnson, I know I've already apologized, but I truly want you to keep this letter as a reminder for me of the promise I made. I will never forget the invaluable lesson you've given me." Eleanor took the letter from Jessica's hands, her gaze warm and tender, as she looked at the young woman before her. Her voice was as gentle as a spring breeze. "Jessica, I will cherish it, and I believe you will keep your promise." Jessica nodded firmly, her eyes sparkling with hope. Eleanor stepped into the car, waving a quiet goodbye, glancing out the window one last time. Jessica stood still, waving back, and on her youthful face was the most genuine smile Eleanor had ever seen since meeting her. The car pulled away from the Grand American Hotel. Inside the car's comfortable silence, Eleanor slowly opened the small envelope. The letter inside was simple, but Jessica's heartfelt words warmed her heart in a way that felt almost magical. "Dear Ms. Johnson, from the bottom of my heart, I sincerely apologize to you. I have come to understand the mistake I made, and I promise never to let prejudice harm others again. Thank you for giving me the most valuable lesson of my life. Jessica Carter." Eleanor gently folded the letter and carefully placed it into her small bag. She knew she would keep it with her, as a quiet reminder that even the smallest efforts to change can hold profound meaning. And in that moment Eleanor felt at peace, knowing that she had succeeded, not only in building a powerful hotel chain, but more importantly, in helping someone find their way back to kindness, respect, and true sincerity. As the car drove further away, Eleanor glanced back one final time at the Grand American Hotel, where she had experienced such an emotional and unforgettable journey. She knew that the change she hoped for might not be immediately visible, but at least today, she had planted an important seed, and within her the hope for a brighter future bloomed more beautifully than ever before. The car slowly rolled through the familiar streets of Chicago, with the gentle sunlight spreading evenly across every corner, creating an unusually peaceful scene. Eleanor sat quietly in the car, still holding the small letter from Jessica in her hand, her eyes gazing out the window as if lost in deep thought about the long journey she had just undergone. Not just the story of yesterday, but the entire tumultuous and challenging life she had lived. Memories from her younger years, the times she had been looked down upon, the prejudices about her skin color and gender, all suddenly rushed back more powerfully than ever before. But this time, Eleanor didn't feel sorrow or pain. Instead, she felt an unusual tranquility within herself, as though all those experiences had a deeper meaning, far beyond the negative emotions she had once endured. Eleanor gently looked out at the city passing by outside the window, and in that moment she realized that her story was no longer just her own. It was a shared story with many others out there, those who had been overlooked, discriminated against, or cast aside because of their age, race, or appearance. Eleanor understood that her recent experience was a precious opportunity to send a powerful message to all those who had once been like her, those who had silently endured injustice and prejudice. In the stillness of the car ride to the airport, Eleanor quietly whispered to herself, "Perhaps it's time to say this, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been hurt by being underestimated." Her hand instinctively tightened around Jessica's letter, as if to draw strength from it. Then, with a gentle motion, she took out her phone and began to write the words from the depths of her heart, words she hoped would reach the hearts of anyone who needed to hear them. To those who have ever been looked down upon, who have had to silently endure prejudices because of their skin color, age, or differences in appearance. I want you to know that the true value of a person is never found in the eyes of others. It lies deep within the heart, in your dignity, and in how you face life. Eleanor's voice, though gentle, was strong. Each word written as if supported by decades of life experience and a firm belief in the strength of human dignity. Never let the prejudices or judgments of others make you doubt your own worth. You don't need to shout to be heard. Just know who you are, walk with self-respect, and no one can take away your true value. Eleanor paused for a moment, a feeling of emotion and pride welling up inside her. These words were not only a message to others, but a deep reminder to herself. A woman who had endured so many prejudices and challenges, but had never lost faith in herself. The car gently turned onto the road leading to the airport. Eleanor looked up, seeing the vast blue sky stretched out endlessly before her. She felt strongly that, after everything that had happened, what she would leave behind was not a business empire, not fame or power, but this message. A simple yet profound statement for all those who had ever felt hurt or left behind. As the car stopped in front of the airport, Eleanor put her phone away, took a deep breath, feeling lighter and more at peace than ever before. She stepped out of the car, her eyes focused forward with confidence and serenity. In that moment, she knew for certain that her life was truly complete. Not because of success or wealth, but because she had used her life to send the most meaningful message one person could share with the world. And deep within her heart, Eleanor hoped that anyone who read the words she wrote today would find the strength to walk with dignity, self-respect, and confidence in their own true worth. Because, in the end, the most valuable lesson she had learned in this long, challenging life was simply this: you don't need to shout to be heard. Just know who you are, walk with self-respect, and no one can take away your true value. Eleanor Johnson's story is perhaps not just the story of a strong woman overcoming prejudice, but also a profound message that reminds us of the true worth of every human being. Life is full of judgments and prejudices, but how we perceive and treat each other is what truly matters. What about you? Have you ever found yourself misunderstood or underestimated like Eleanor? Share your story with us in the comments below. If you found this story meaningful, please share this video with your loved ones, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to help us spread messages of self-respect and kindness in life. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next story.